Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the Panasonic DMC-FZ1000. Priced at $899, this bridge-style mega-zoom point-and-shoot camera is arguably one of the most feature-rich and compelling offerings ever made in its class. And that's because it does pair a 20-megapixel 1-inch sensor, much like the one I'm filming this on right now with the Sony AX100, capable of 4K video capture, as well as 120 frame per second slow-mo and 720p with a very solid piece of glass, and much longer, I might add, than what you'll find with the older RX10, a camera that many like to compare this to, but really shouldn't, because if there is a successor to the RX10, which I suspect we will see, that's really the camera this should be compared to. Of course, this will also have a pricing edge by the time that hits the market, since there are literally no rumors. So if you're interested in this camera, be sure of one thing: there is nothing else on the horizon right now that really, I would argue, can compare to it. So that is definitely an advantage when it comes to this constant cycle of refresh that the entire camera business does undergo. Now, the 25 to 400 mil glass is important because that 35 millimeter equivalency reach is complemented by an f2.8 to f4 rating. So the RX10 has f2.8 across its entire reach, but it only stops at 200 millimeters. Here you do legitimately have a mega zoom camera. Many people feel that it doesn't live up to the mega zoom name because they're used to what very small sensor mega zoom cameras, like something that I have right here to the left, the Sony HX400V, would offer, a 1200 millimeter reach. But keep in mind that the sensor inside this camera is nowhere near the capability of the sensor inside the FZ1000. And you can see from the size, they're comparable. Of course, the 1000 is a larger camera, more expensive camera. Keep in mind, this mega zoom retailed for $500 at launch, does not record in 4K, doesn't offer you the same still capability, nor does it have as fast Carl Zeiss glass as the Leica glass you're getting here. But when it comes to the actual reach, even though we peak at 400, because we have a much larger sensor with 20 megapixels of information, you can easily use Panasonic's intelligent zoom, comparable to Sony's clear image zoom, that really focuses on retaining image detail, to take this lens all the way to, I think even with the digital zoom, 1600 millimeters in change. So really, this is a mega zoom, even though you only see 25 to 400, because you do have a much larger sensor than any mega zoom that has preceded it. Keep in mind, you do have image stabilization, as you can see right there, a switch for that, as well as your zoom or focus, and that's to select whether or not this ring, there's only one ring on this camera, will be designated to control either the zoom or focus. It is relatively fast in performance. This is one of the faster cameras on the market when it comes to startup time or to actually zooming in on your subject and focusing. This camera is pretty much going to outperform the competition, even though, again, there is no legitimate competition for this camera. In terms of controls, this has just about everything you would want. I like the placement of the video capture button right here at the top, even though I personally am very accustomed to Sony's placement, which, as many of you know, is usually over here on the grip on a camera this size. I still have become comfortable with this in a very short period of time. In terms of customizable buttons, there are plenty of them. Their placement is somewhat suspect. You can see some function buttons right here. Then we also have another function button here, another function button here. So Panasonic has made sure to accommodate the enthusiasts that they are targeting with this camera. And if you're wondering who would spend $900 on a fixed lens camera like this, it's really someone who needs this as a B camera, or is really just looking to ditch the gear bag. You already have a collection of lenses, a digital SLR that you may or may not use, maybe a mirrorless camera, and they know that even though this is large, it is one body that does everything. And that's because the 4K video capture here, MP4 format, is going to give you 100 megabits per second performance. You will need, by the way, a special SD card. By that I mean even SD cards that I thought were going to be fast enough to work with this, like the one I'm capturing this on right now with my Sony AX100, a $2,000 video camera. This is what you will need, something with a UHS 3 rating. Otherwise, you aren't going to be able to get any 4K video capture out of this beast. So keep that in mind. It, of course, will accept slower cards, but you're not going to be able to record 4K video at 30 frames per second. Also, while I'm here, I want to talk about battery life, as I'm putting the card in the wrong way. Battery life on this camera is relatively solid. It's not as good as many would have hoped, but I have to say again, for the price point, Panasonic went with a solid battery that's been in their lineup for a long time, and as a result, they're not that expensive. You can of course get third-party no-name batteries as well, and in terms of my use, I've seen about 350 to 400 stills, depending on the still mode. Keep in mind some combine multiple exposures, multiple images, and as a result, you can't really put a single number on it, but that's what I would give an estimation of battery life. When it comes to video, a different story. Keep in mind, video clips are limited to 29 minutes in length because this is not a video camera, but you know, I've only used it in mixed usage. If you wanted to use it strictly in video, I can't give you a firm number, so I'm not going to, of course, make anything up. I never do here at the Digest. In terms of other things to point out on the bottom, tripod mount is not centered. To me, it's not a huge issue because for my use, it's not. For some of you, it will be. That's why I point it out. You're not going to be able to get access to the battery or SD card in many instances. If you're using a quick release plate like many amateurs, enthusiasts, and pros do, then you're going to run into that problem. I have a feeling this placement has not only to do with limitations associated with what's inside the camera, but also just actually managing the weight of this 400mm 35 equivalency reach lens, which is gigantic. I mean, when you think about what this is comparable to, what they've actually accommodated here, it's a marvel. And the fact that it's actually paired with a decent sensor. Now, many will ask, can you really compare this 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor to an interchangeable mirrorless camera? And yes, you can in many instances. And I would say that comes down to what you're actually going to end up spending on glass. That's when we're talking about still performance. And that's because this camera does have 12 frames per second continuous autofocus. And it really just, as you saw when I started it up, everything is fast on this. Quicker than just about anything else out there. And arguably as competent as many cameras in the interchangeable lens world. Also, because it does have that 4K video advantage and the 120 frame per second 720p slow-mo video capture, that also sets it apart from many interchangeable lenses. But at the end of the day, if you require an interchangeable lens system, this really isn't the right camera for you to buy unless it's going to be a B camera like it is for me. This is a complement to my A7R. If I leave the house with this in the A7R, I pretty much have everything I could possibly want. In the past, I would have had to bring this puppy out that I'm pointing at now, the AX100, which is considerably larger than this camera and does not have the focal reach that this maintains in its form factor. There's just a lot more camera here. Of course, the AX100 is a video camera, so not really a like comparison, but for the video prowess this offers, and the fact that you can pull 8 megapixel stills from any of that 4K that you're recording, which in effect gives you really solid still capture anytime you're filming video, which is a great advantage for a novice or a photojournalist. I mean, that shows you how broad the spectrum is. The camera really is just unmatched, if I haven't reiterated that enough thus far. Now, other things I want to point out that are important, the audio on board is decent. I don't expect any miracles there. We're already getting arguable miracles in the lens and sensor pairing, video capture department, so I don't really care so much that we don't have a way to monitor audio. We do have a microphone input right there. No weather sealing here like on the RX10, but then again, there's no neutral density filter either. There's no really silent way to adjust aperture. Here, in order to adjust aperture, you're going to be using this, which is loud and clunky compared to the silent aperture ring that you can also use in a step mode with a simple switch on the RX10. But the RX10 doesn't have 4K capture. It doesn't have a 400mm lens. So I really just think it's not even close to a false equivalency. Let's put it at that. The only thing they share in common, really, at the end of the day, is that they are both in the bridge style category and they have a very similar, almost identical sensor. And of course, the RX10 did just benefit from getting a firmware update that includes now a higher video quality mode, but still no unlock for 4K there. So this is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it looks like it's going to have a monopoly on this segment for quite some time. So I've already talked about battery life, fantastic video capture, fantastic still capture. Let's talk about the EVF. You also notice there's a hot shoe up here for accessories, another added benefit if you want to expand capability and overall your growth with this camera, because again, I really do think it does appeal to a very wide array of customers, from, as I mentioned earlier, the novice, the beginner, all the way up to the pro enthusiast that just doesn't want to carry all the gear, and they'd rather have something like this, like I'm even alluding to myself, carrying this with the A7R, arguably better than me, carrying around my A6000 and my FE70-200 glass, even though, of course, the FE70-200 glass kills this. Again, it's about the convenience and the fact that I do have 4K here. I do have an arguably solid performing sensor. And then I do have a legitimate OLED-based electronic viewfinder, something that you couldn't necessarily peg on any bridge-style camera other than the RX10. So we've got that added bonus. We also have a 921K 3-inch LCD that is more than capable in direct sunlight, something that's very good to have. And also, it does fully articulate. Right now I have it, facing us, the camera, but you can actually use it for selfies. You can flip it around and close it up when you're just using the viewfinder. In terms of battery life, using the viewfinder LCD screen, those will affect battery life times as well, something else to take into account. Many have argued that they think the viewfinder uses more battery than the LCD. I have not seen any real evidence of that. Keep in mind that many people felt that this was going to be a great performer when it comes to battery life because the GH4 is so impressive. This is not the GH4. Yes, it does have the same processor driving the entire experience, which is one of the reasons that the video comes so close to the GH4, which is one of the best value oriented points about this camera, is that it is, in a sense, a baby GH4 when it comes to video. It's the still side that it can't compare to the GH4 directly, and that's because the GH4 is an interchangeable lens camera. It does have a touch screen. This does not. It does have arguably the same EVF, which again tells you a lot about the quality and value of this camera. Arguably very similar body style, but again, we've got a fixed lens and a sensor that isn't as large as the GH4. We also have recording video limitations, that 29-minute limit that the GH4 doesn't suffer from, as well as the camcorder I'm filming this on now. Part of the reason that for me this isn't a perfect fit for the digest replacing my AX100 is because of those 29-minute clips. So it's not the end-all, certainly usable, I think, for most people, and I could use it in many instances. I already have, but the AX100 is better suited for my needs since I do tend to do lengthy reviews, and those of you that are subscribers already know that. In terms of other things you should note, on this side we have access to our video out, our HDMI, as well as a remote jack and an AV USB jack, and that's going to allow you to transfer images from the camera if you choose not to use the Wi-Fi NFC on board, which will allow you to do sharing quite seamlessly. As well, I want to point out that even though this doesn't have access to a store the way Sony markets and gives you access to different applications, which is, I think, a value-oriented feature, even though Sony is looking to capitalize and make more money, Panasonic does throw in things like time-lapse. You may have noticed this dial here. Not only does it have a time mode, but time-lapse is also on there, as well as exposure compensation mode, as well as, of course, your drive mode. This is the exact orientation, by the way, the dials that you'll get with the GH4. Much like I mentioned, most of the body is. It's just the orientation of these buttons, like the record button is on the back of the GH4. Here it's up at the top. Of course, no zoom rocker for the GH4 interchangeable lens camera system. But as I mentioned before, you can control the zoom here with the zoom ring. If you switch this switch, you'll go back to focus. All of those function buttons are really just so that no one could argue or complain that this camera doesn't have customization capability. And you do have two custom modes on the mode dial here. You also have your dedicated video mode. And I want to point out that when you're in the video mode, that is the only time you can capture 4K. And I've complained about this in previous updates because it really is arguably my only complaint about this camera, because I would like to be able to be in a still mode and be able to switch seamlessly to 4K. But because 4K is cropped on this camera, it's the only way Panasonic, I guess, could pull it off. You're looking at roughly 37 millimeters to almost 600 millimeters in reach. So that's where, again, the 400, because we're now cropped, you're getting even more reach, which is quite incredible for a camera at this price point. Again, more reach than the AX100 I'm filming this on right now, and the AX100 is $2,000. More than double the price of this camera. So that's, again, part of the value. But the image stabilization, when you're filming with this, nowhere near the capability of the AX100. Also, the AX100 does have a wider starting point. You're looking at 29 millimeters to about 370, 365, I think it is. So it's a 12x lens versus the 16x lens here. And as I mentioned before, once you start playing with digital zoom on the still side, your reach is, not infinite, but over 1600 millimeters, which is insane. So really, there are no shortcomings, in my opinion, with this camera outside of what I just mentioned. Really also the size of it, but to me, the size is a negligible argument. This is a bridge-style camera. No one expects a bridge-style camera to be small. And because it has that best-in-class autofocus and tracking, I might add, it really is just a beast in every category. I do wish that we had some XAVCS, something in between the 4K MP4 video capture and the 1080p at 28 megabits per second. So that's your range. You've got 100 and then 28, but there's nothing in between. I wish there was. Sony, of course, does have a lot of that going for it, but they don't have any camera capable right now of 4K video capture in body other than the one I'm shooting on right now. And that's at the consumer level, of course, that I'm talking about. So this is really just an impressive overall package. Inside the menus, and by the way, clean layout here. I mean, the body is predominantly plastic, and that will lend to a far less, I would say, quality feel than you'll get from the RX-10, which is weather sealed also. I really think weather sealing and the neutral density filters are the only true advantages to that camera. Some seamless video features as well, like I mentioned, the aperture control being silent as compared to this dial. But otherwise, since most of your audio should be done, separately and not on body, especially with a camera like this, even though it has mic input, no way to monitor, it really comes down to what you're going to use it for at the end of the day. The good news is that the menu system is extraordinarily clean, easy to navigate. They even, Panasonic, tell you what every single thing is about. You'll see as I go through the menus here, right at the top, it tells you exactly what you're looking at. So in many events, what used to require jumping to a manual for the average user is now answered right out of the box. So, an interesting, easy, simple approach. Panasonic has been doing this right for a long time now. This is just the first camera, for me personally, that I just had to get to review for all of you because it is that compelling. And that's what I do here at the Digest. Everything that I review, I tend to focus on only the best of the best. And that's why the majority of what I review you end up hearing me give praise to. Of course, with some points of critique and criticism, and the Panasonic falls right into that solidly. It really does everything well that it sets out to do. Yes, it has some shortcomings, but it's basically the only camera of its kind in the market. But again, just taking you through some of the 5 pages here associated with video capture. It has everything you'd expect, and that's really important, and then some. I mean, it really does have quite a bit going for it that everyone, I think, really can appreciate. And it's really a matter of whether or not you are looking to replace that entire gear bag, like myself in this instance. And this does give me an element of flexibility I just can't find with any other camera in the market now because of the prowess in both the still and video that this camera is capable of. And Panasonic just hit this one out of the park, in my opinion. Could it have had more? Sure. Everything in every format, every market can always have more. But this really has set the bar very high. I think it's going to give Panasonic itself a tough time. I think it's going to cannibalize GH4 sales to a degree because I think a lot of people out there picked up the GH4 because of the internal 4K video capture. And this renders that pretty much, you know, moot at this point, because if that's all you're really after, and you've already got a full frame interchangeable lens camera like myself, then this is pretty much the best option out there, even better than the AX100 I'm shooting on now, because most people do not need continuous video unless they're wedding videographers. Most people do not need what the AX100 offers. So that's where the FZ1000 steps in and says, hey, I'll give you the best of both worlds, and I'll do it at a price that, yes, is still a premium at $900, but we're giving you everything. I mean, I didn't even mention the eye sensor here. Also, exactly as expected in terms of function, and it does its job. Another element of, you know, professional grade cameras, as well as even point and shoots. I mean, I mentioned before I brought into frame the HX400V. This camera also has one of those sensors, so not, you know, it doesn't require a $900 price point to get that in build, but the fact that it's there just shows that Panasonic has been listening, and that's something that, you know, a good manufacturer will do. And when I look at how well Sony has done over the last, you know, 5 years in terms of changing the landscape of digital imaging, Panasonic is right there with them, not on the same as broad a scale, but I would say as competent a one, because they recognize that you've got to push the envelope in order to actually get attention and change the game. And this is a game changer. Anyone who thinks it isn't or is questioning it simply hasn't used the camera. Because it really does, as I've said through the course of this video, everything that it sets out to competently. And even if it comes down to the Wi-Fi and NFC capability, which is something that other cameras struggle with. The fact that it has time-lapse on board and you don't actually have to buy an application, yet another value feature. I know it sounds ridiculous, but coming from someone who's Sony-centric like myself, I appreciate the fact that Panasonic has just thrown it on here. You can see time-lapse video right there, even on the playback mode. So really nice to have all these features. I really think the killer app, though, on this camera, besides everything I've stated, and I've already mentioned this, is that ability to pull 8-megapixel stills from any 4K video capture. Because really that means you're never going to miss a moment. Of course, the entire concept, the idea of this camera is to never miss a moment, because with an interchangeable lens system, even with, you know, the same 12 frame per second continuous autofocus capability, you still at some point are going to need to pull that lens off, switch it with something else to get the right shot to accommodate your creativity and what you're looking to accomplish, either on a personal or professional level. And here, you simply don't need to do that. So whether you're in still or video mode, arguably, you're not going to miss a shot because of your camera. And gear getting in the way is simply the worst thing to happen to anyone, again, whether you're a beginner or a professional. I think that's pretty easy and logical to get on board with. So Panasonic has made a clean piece of equipment, top to bottom, from the menus that you saw here, the shooting modes. I mean, really giving you everything you could want, not just in a point-and-shoot mega zoom, but even arguably something that would live in the realm of interchangeables. Granted, this doesn't because of its fixed lens, but it certainly will be compared to many mirrorless offerings simply because of the fact that it does sport a 1-inch sensor, and it does do things, again, that no other camera other than its big brother, the GH4 right now, can pull off in a body, at least, which is that 4K video capture capability. And while that is just a bragging right for the time being, I do think, as I said at the beginning of the video, and I think this is the third time already, because there's nothing on the horizon to actually take this head on, it makes it even more compelling. You know you're buying something for a change that isn't going to be bumped off the block by a new camera next week. And even if Sony does manage to get something out there, as I mentioned earlier, to replace the RX10, there's no question that it is going to be more expensive than this camera. Remember, the RX10 debuted at $1,300. It's been lowered to $999 to compete directly with this camera. But in my opinion, there's really no competition. If you're interested in stills first and you don't care about the extra focal reach here, the RX10 is the winner. But if you actually care about getting the best overall capability as a photographic tool that you can possibly achieve, price aside, but just in a single body, the FZ1000 delivers that. Then when you take into account that it's $899, it's kind of mind-numbing, and the fact that this price is going to drop. So it's only going to get less expensive with time, and again, that's once it gets into stock, once it's been on shelves for a while. It's still out of stock more than a month after release, and that speaks volumes about why this camera is out of stock, I should say, and popular. It's because, as I've mentioned, through the 25 minutes roughly of this video, it just is a stunner. So it all comes down to personal preference, needs, and flexibility. Of course, an interchangeable lens system is going to offer you, boatloads of flexibility when it comes to lens options, something that you'll never have the ability to do here. But you'll have the advantage of, not having to clean dust off your sensor, and really having an all-in-one solution out of the box that you can't do with any interchangeable lens system. And I know so many people out there right now, and many of you that are watching this already have bought into a system, and you know what's collecting dust. You know whether or not you've made a wrong decision, and at that point, that's that moment when you realize Panasonic may have just created the perfect camera for you. And for those beginners out there who are looking to step into photography and grow the hobby, this is a perfect tool because it gives you everything you could possibly want. And yes, it comes at a definitely, I would say, high price, but again, relative to what it brings to the table, that's when it becomes a bargain. So the FZ1000, I think, will make just about any user happy. I think the biggest turnoff really at the end of the day is its size, but that shouldn't be, considering if you really know anything, you know that the size isn't that big considering what this camera brings. Again, the AX100 I'm filming this on, nowhere near as flexible. Yes, better image stabilization, a wider bevy of codecs for video capture. It should have that, and unlimited recording. But otherwise, this camera kills it and does it at less than half cost. So when I start to think of that, or the GH4, which body alone is roughly $1,700, and then you're going to pair lenses, you're well over $2,000. Again, this camera is a killer. Especially when you take into account how much they share in common, literally down to hardware. As I mentioned, the same processor driving, the same chip driving this, not the same sensor clearly, but the same chip driving the entire experience, virtually the same menu system, virtually the same build, of course, different materials, as well as just a more professional piece of hardware, the GH4, and that's why I wouldn't compare it, but inherently people will. And then, of course, lastly, the A7S from Sony, which is a great camera, a low-light genius, but the 4K capture is external, and again, pricing insane when compared to even the GH4. It enters another realm when you pair glass with that $2,500 body. So the FZ1000 has so much going for it. The fact that it starts up instantly, like you saw, that for many users already is just the beginning of what clearly will, I would say, mark a road of just, basically everything you want going smoothly. So whether it's the startup, shut off, the autofocus, the video capability, all of those things are great. And then Panasonic has thought of everything that you could possibly want. I mean, go ahead and look for criticism of this camera, and you will be hard-pressed to find many people saying, I returned it because it couldn't do what I needed it to. I've seen many say it's more than capable for videography, for weddings. I personally would not want to use something like this, but, and that's mostly to do with stabilization, of course. It can be mounted to a million different things, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the tripod mount is less than ideal for mounting, so that's where I would say it's a drawback. And again, not being able to monitor audio, but otherwise, I can understand where videographers are coming from, because the quality that this thing outputs, some would argue, is better than the AX100 I'm filming this on now. And that's because, again, it does have 100 megabits per second, which is higher than the compression rate Sony's using with the XAVC-S format that they rely on for 4K capture in the AX100 and the A7S. So, I mean, this is really a matter of how you want to spend your money at the end of the day. For me personally, as I mentioned, this basically goes in the bag with the A7R, which gives me the other, the opposite end of the spectrum. Full frame camera, 36 megapixels, interchangeable lens system, landscape photography, something you can try to do with the 25 wide angle on here, but remember in video 37, and for many of you that'll kill the deal, because even though this does 4K and at a low price for the industry and also unmatched by any hardware in the industry, I can tell you that when I use this for video, it took some time to get accustomed to the fact that I wasn't going to start at 29 like the AX100 or any of my other interchangeable lens cameras capable of exceptional 1080p AVC HD capture. So it takes some time getting used to that, but the fact that the reach is, again, almost 600 millimeters, I think makes up for the fact that it's not a wide angle beginning, at least in 4K. You have to remember it's accomplishing a direct readout of video from the 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, and in order to do that direct readout, it has to crop. There is no way around it, because the 20 megapixel sensor clearly offers more information than the 4K video stream. So eventually we'll see higher video captures down the road. We'll get to 8K, but for now 4K just getting started. This is the second consumer camera capable of 4K video capture at a price that is not bonkers, in my opinion. Of course, the AX100 was first announced at CES. Again, that's what I'm using to film this, as well as all my other content, and it is a great video camera. But if you want the best of both worlds, that's exactly what the Panasonic FZ1000 pulls off. And again, that price really, in my opinion, is very solid. You still retain all of the scene modes. I didn't go through them, the gimmicks. When it comes to scene modes, I'll just show them now anyway. Why not? Most of you that subscribe know already my format, and I do everything completely, not live, but as close to live as I could get. Very minimal, if any, editing at all, and nothing is scripted here. For those of you wondering, none of my videos are, no points in front of me. That's why things often, I will repeat myself, and that's also because I do want to reemphasize what I think are the most important points about the camera, or whatever I'm reviewing for that matter, because often people are spending a lot of their hard-earned money, and I want to make sure that they know the overall pros and cons of the camera, the real-world issues they'll encounter. No overheating, by the way, with video on this. Even filming 29 minutes, I can attest to that, even though I said I never ran down a battery on video alone. But you can see there are plenty of different presets, and they all work as expected. The raw capture on here, I didn't mention a lot about that, but I believe there is Lightroom support at this point. If there isn't, go ahead and feel free to correct me. But really, I can't think of anything that this camera doesn't accomplish. And even the presets here, fairly straightforward, getting quick access to different things. Of course, because I'm in the scene mode, we're not getting quick access. The auto intelligent modes, basically very similar to what Sony has. You've got one mode that's going to give you a single exposure intelligent mode, and then the other one is going to combine multiple exposures when it deems necessary, very similar to Sony's auto intelligent plus mode, basically. So Sony users also are going to feel at home with this, even though it's Panasonic. It's a departure from what you may be accustomed to. I know a lot of my viewers are used to seeing Sony cameras here, but still, everything's intuitive. Everything's straightforward, and the things you don't know about, once you find out how to use them, you'll really appreciate the quick access you have with all of the menus that Panasonic has put together. No fumbling around for things, which I think is critical when you're shooting. So quick access to your, basically all of your core components here that you would possibly need. And then, as I've mentioned, all of the function capability, your playback button right there, and you can customize that. You saw as well when I went through the settings. And you can see right there we've got 800 millimeters of reach right now in this still mode that I've got going. That's because I do have the intelligent zoom on. If I go into another mode, manual mode, you will see that we now have 1600 millimeters of reach. That's because I have the digital zoom enabled as well. So no question, this is a mega zoom camera. The only thing at the end of the day that really I would say is a downside outside of the size, and I've mentioned this over and over again, is the fact that you do need those UHS 3 SD cards. That really isn't a downside. They're just expensive now because there aren't that many options on the market. I've already shared that Transcend card that's in here with everyone in the past. So if you are looking for an affordable option, this is definitely the best way to go. You're looking at a 64 gig card for $35 to $40, depending on the vendor you go with. I'll include links for both, of course, the camera as well as the SD card to Amazon, which of course is reputable. Keep in mind, Amazon does, of course, have third-party sellers on there as well. So, be aware of who you're ordering it from. And then, of course, B&H is always a go-to for me personally. They're local, they're fast and reliable, and no BS, which is important. You're not going to have any problems with them whatsoever on return policy or just regular customer service, no upselling. This is in no way a plug for them, but it's just the reality of the camera world in this day and age. So make sure you buy this from a reseller that has a realistic and, I would say, trustworthy return policy, no restocking fee, and give yourself a good 30 days like you should with a $900 investment. But hopefully from watching this video and doing your own research, you already know this is right for you, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish. This way we don't have to go through returns. That is the focus here. It's finding the right product for whoever is interested in my channel. And right now, I again see nothing that takes the FZ1000 on head on. The RX10 is basically the only other camera that anyone can mention in the same conversation with this, and vice versa. But at the end of the day, the FZ1000 pretty much kills the RX10 in just about every way that I can imagine outside of what I've mentioned. I'm not going to beat the dead horse here any longer. Hope you all enjoyed the review. I know the FZ1000 is a keeper, and it will be for some time, at least until Panasonic updates or Sony possibly basically kills this with their next offering, because time is on their side. But again, nothing has come out of Sony regarding something to up the ante on this, and there are a lot of reasons for that. They're going through their own issues right now and focusing on what they believe is the next wave, things like the QX1, modular cameras. So they've got a whole different strategy. Panasonic does not make anywhere near the number of cameras that Sony does, so it's tough to compare manufacturers, even though I tend to compare just about everyone that falls into the same price range. But again, I hope this has helped all of you that are thinking about this camera or other comparable models. I really don't think this will disappoint at the end of the day. It does everything. It does it well. It does it fast. And that's what we have come to expect in this world of immediate gratification. The FZ1000 is a winner. I have no hesitations recommending it if that wasn't clear already. Just remember, you will need those high-speed cards for the 4K video. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.